in a decline unless they see the future of that incline, right? If somebody comes and builds a house here now, there's a chance someone might not live in it. Is that thought process from the outside, and we have to change that tide and head in a different direction. So having that vision document and having that goal to shoot for, Rutland 1 and as a whole, everybody going for the same goal is probably the most critical part of turning things around.
Taylor, we were talking about, sounding the alarm. The question asker was wondering if the population has been dwindling, why hasn't the local government done more? And here's the money question. What do you as mayor plan to do about that, and how will you encourage young people to start their lives in the city with a declining population?
So I guess I'd like to answer that to go back about 20 years. And the reason I do that is because that is, I think, kind of the critical period where we here in the greater Rutland region lost several of our large manufacturers. Across the country, manufacturing moved overseas. It was, created a vacuum, and it created a vacuum in our region. And that vacuum has never been filled back up. And I think for a lot of different reasons. And the alarm bell has been sounding around here, but when you look around Vermont and you see where the growth is, because there is growth in Vermont, it's situated in, I think most everybody here knows this, it's been situated in northwestern Vermont. Chittenden County, Franklin County has seen really a population explosion, a growth explosion. I was just up there the other night at a basketball game. I'm still amazed at the amount of construction that is going on up there, even in these inflationary times. And where the growth is, and where all that support is coming out of Montpelier, that in turn is not happening down here. Now, the alarm bells need to continue to be sounded. I think all the candidates, both at the Board of Alderman level and at the mayoral level, have been talking about housing. Housing is a critical piece. If you talk to any major employer here in the Rutland region, medical center, GE, Casellas, they're all telling me basically the same thing, that they're trying to hire new employees. They identify those new employees, but what's holding them back is no place for them to live. And until we address that situation, it's going to be very hard to increase our population. Now, I hear the number being tossed around about increasing it by 15,000. Well, that would be great if we, first of all, had housing, but if we had the area and the ability to address what the needs of an extra 15,000 people would be, because there would be a tremendous amount of expense involved in that. Not that we can't do it, but it would have to be done incrementally and have to be done over time. The schools would have to hire more teachers, more support personnel. The infrastructure would have to be upgraded. It just would have to be an awful lot that would go into increasing it that much. I think if we look at doing it in small steps and have everybody on board, and I will say I'm very fortunate that the Board of Aldermen over the last few years, and myself, have worked in a collegial way where we're all more or less talking about the same issues, just a different way. Thank you.
We're wrapping up. You brought up just now housing as being a key issue, and that came up with a number of questions that we received. So let's dig into that a little bit. Using hotels as temporary housing in Rutland is bringing crime and violence to our city. Most residents do not want the hotels used for long-term housing. What can we as a community, what can we as individuals and as a city do to fix this dilemma? What is your plan? David, let me start with you.
Absolutely. So this is a topic that I have raised at any forums or any events that I have been at for the last, going on a couple of years now, Project Vision meetings, Rotary meetings. I've talked to the Rutland County Legislative Delegation, which I think there's a couple of members, former members that are here in our audience tonight, about that very issue. I think it's the number one issue facing our community, and there is a lot of reasons for low-level crime, and actually the more serious crime that we're seeing. And one is the hotel issue, but it's also the bail reform laws. There was a change to those statutes which I think coincided with the COVID coming on, and the long-term effects have been very negative. What you see, we read up on our social media pages about our heroic Rutland City Police going out and arresting folks where they're turned around and right back out the street doing the same things. That's got to stop. And somehow we've got to convince our lawmakers, all of us, not just government, but everybody in the community. It's got to continue to talk to the neighbors, talk to their legislators, that it's having a real world negative effect on our quality of life here in the city. And if we want to do any of the good things that are in motion right now and see them out to the end, to a successful end, we have to address that.
Let me just push back with asking this question, wondering what can we as a community and as individuals do? You brought up some policy issues like bail, but is there anything that the community in Rutland can do to help the folks that are in need of housing and are in temporary rooms and hotels right now?
Well, we have an organization that's been in place now for about 10 years, Project Vision, which we both talk about, and which is so important. There is a revitalization of Project Vision over the last several months. It has a new leader, Matt Prouty. He's come back to the Rutland Police Department. We're so pleased that that's happened. And I think at the last meeting, I go to all the meetings, but the last one there was double the attendance. So I think that there is a buy-in by the community that they understand that they play a role in addressing what the homeless situation is. And there's homeless for Rutland City residents and Rutland County residents, and then you have a population which are mostly in the hotels, which have come to our community basically on a free route. And that's what's creating the havoc. So we have to get together, figure out who are the ones, the families, the legitimately homeless that need the help. All the other communities in Vermont are grappling with the same thing. And help those folks find them housing, do some short-term fixes. I brought up in the last debate that I serve on the ad hoc housing committee. I know there's a couple people that are in the audience tonight that are serving on that. We got to figure out short-term and then look at the long-term strategy for addressing it too.
So I'm going to throw the same question to you and I'll repeat it so you hear it. Mm-hmm. Using hotels as temporary housing in Rutland is bringing crime and violence to our city. Most residents do not want the hotels used for long-term housing. What can we as a community, what can we as individuals and as a city do to fix this dilemma? And what is your plan?
So let's start with the community piece. The community right now, Dave was talking about Project Vision. And Project Vision, one of the big things in that last meeting that we heard consistently throughout these small working groups is there's a lot of what's called compassion fatigue, right? There are people that have been working in this community with this particular set of people, really working through all these challenges, and that has drained a lot of these volunteers, a lot of these social workers. So what can the community do to help? Getting involved, stepping up, volunteering, talking to your friends. We have positions open in the city for mental health workers that can't be filled. Talk to your friends that live out of town and say, hey, this is a great place to live. Why don't you move here? You can do that. You can come do some of that mental health work here. So that's definitely the community aspect of, communication, passing information back and forth, volunteering, those things we can do. Because what happens is people who are living in the hotels right now, they need that transition situation. So that's the next piece, right? So what can we do as a city? The city can help develop with our partners. So the other partners we were talking about, a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day transition. If you look at the Rutland Housing Authority, they were able to link in place, what the trust was able to link in place, take 11 individuals out of the hotels and put them into transitional housing, right? So we already have partners that have these skill sets and have the tools. We have to take the leadership, though, to say, here's the path for every single person in those hotels, and here's how we get them to move forward. And it doesn't matter whether they're from our community or not. We can figure out, the separation of that piece and how we get them maybe back to where they where they originally came from. Maybe they want to go home. We can help them do that. But in reality, we aren't going to be able to solve the problem by asking the state for help. It's going to take years and years for that additional help to come, and anything other than the dollars and the grants that exist today. So we have to use our partnerships, leverage those relationships, ask for those dollars that exist, and focus them on a plan. And I do believe that the city can lead that plan forward and develop that with our partners.
A number of people have brought up the difficulty in finding housing in Rutland in general. You both just addressed the issue affecting people that don't have housing at all. But there are a lot of landlords, and I think you're both landlords, if I'm not mistaken. There are a lot of landlords that are taking their homes off the regular rental market and turning them into Airbnbs. This person wondered, a number of people brought up the difficulty in finding housing. Landlords who have converted rental properties into Airbnbs. What are your plans to improve affordable housing in the city? Let's go with you first.
Sure. So we have to recognize the challenge first. There's actually, it's funny, as we go and put signs out, we do this campaigning, we spend time in almost every single neighborhood. And what we're recognizing, and what I'm recognizing as I'm going around, is there's a lot of vacant property. There's a great deal of vacant property here in the city of landlords that maybe haven't converted them to Airbnbs, they're just empty. Maybe some of these properties aren't good enough quality to have people living in. Maybe some of them just need additional help to renovate them. So we have to increase that housing stock with what we have available first. So the Board of Aldermen have been putting together a rental rehab revitalization program, which will allow for 0% or low percent interest loans for people who live in their property that want to revitalize those apartments, right, that are in that building. So we can do that. We can actually draw additional people into those spaces, and they're a little bit nicer, a little bit more upgraded, so they charge a little bit more. What it does is that frees up lower income housing for other people to use, right? It frees up a place that might cost a little bit less. The other piece that I think is really important here is we need to continue to focus on development and growth. Now that's a longer term strategy, but if we continue to focus on filling that gap for housing and really growing the housing stock, what that does is, for landlords like Dave and I, is that forces us to lower our prices, right? If there's more apartments available, it forces us to lower our prices. So as mayor, what I'll be able to do is lead along with that housing group, right? Because I think I said in the last debate that ad hoc housing group is fantastic. I'm happy to be a member, but I believe the city needs to take a leadership role in that conversation and guide and direct, what we can to really invest in the housing stock in the city to make it more affordable for people that live here.
David Lair, so the question is, what are your plans to improve affordable housing in the city?
So that is a multi-pronged answer, and let me see if I can parse it out a little bit. As far as the ad hoc housing committee that's up and running, I've been a regular attendee, and I'm trying to do what I can to lead the group, at least from the city government side, and let people know that are serving in that committee exactly what we can do under the current set of ordinances and state regulations, and what we need to identify if anything needs to change in order to free up housing. I think there are some things that can be done at the state level. There is some legislation that's being contemplated now to have more condenser buildings in perhaps single-family residential areas, so it would be more opportunities for people growing. We're a city that's surrounded by the town. We only have a certain amount of area that we can build on, and that limits us to some degree. As far as the vacant housing, I think what you've seen quite a bit of is, first of all, there's a lot of responsible landlords out there. You have two of them right here, and there are a lot more out there. You don't hear from them you don't hear about them very much. You hear about the irresponsible landlords, but there are a lot more that are responsible and doing the right thing and trying to invest in their properties. But a lot of people from out of town, down country, bought property up here, sight unseen, during COVID. And they did it because they made some capital gains and made some money on their properties down there, and they wanted to have a place to escape, to get away from being, under the threat of getting COVID, and you can't blame them. But a lot of folks just bought those properties and seeing it never really even happened. And so that's an issue. And then one other thing, we do have, I believe, an aggressive attempt, or actually what we're doing through our building and zoning department, is to register Airbnbs so we can identify where they are, if they can, and if they can pay their fees, and so we know how many that we had in the community. I think most people are doing the right thing and registering, but I think there's still quite a few out there that are not, and I think that's something that the mayor needs to lead on with the board involvement after the election, and perhaps put some legislation in place where you can limit the number of Airbnbs.
Dave, we had a question that kind of rips off the zoning that you just mentioned. The city is currently updating its zoning ordinances. If you could change one thing about the city's zoning, what would it be?
Well, changing something in the current zoning. I think a lot of what I just talked about, being able to responsibly build multifamily homes in zones which haven't historically been able to do. Now, I know that that's going to create some pushback, and it's very understandable. People have bought and purchased and lived in some beautiful properties on more of the outskirts of our community, and it would be a change. But I think, again, if you did it responsibly and thoughtfully, that's a way that you can address the issue.
Same question to you, Michael Dundas. The city's currently updating zoning. If you could change one thing about it, what would it be, and how would that help?
So actually, I've had the privilege of going to the zoning meetings for the past, 2 years. The first year I was on the planning commission and as a signing, and in the past few months, after already Tori stepped down, I've been backfilling that role. So I've been having these conversations, and these meetings are fantastic. There's people with all perspectives, and they really come to these agreements. And I'll kind of echo what Dave said here. Multifamily housing, we have such a demand for housing in our city. And multifamily housing is something that we need to focus on. When we look at that, though, we also have the opportunity to do that in some unique ways without too much disruption, right? So one of the things that we could do is encourage downtown living a little bit more through that process, right? A lot of the office buildings downstairs, they don't have people in the upstairs offices anymore. I've been talking with developers and the owners of those buildings, and the reason that they're not really converting them is it's expensive to do that. So one of the things that we can do using the tools, whether it's building and zoning, or in this case, one of the tools the mayor has in their toolbox is suspending that change of use permit fee if you're converting an office space into housing. It's something that I really plan to do right away, right? So in the first 10 months, maybe in a time frame, we say, hey, if you're converting any office space over to housing and it's downtown, you can do this. And why this is important is if you look at our retirement community, 65 plus, I'm constantly in conversations hearing, I'd love to live downtown. I'd love to live in a place with an elevator that I could just be downtown and walk outside and access the street. And again, remember, if we're moving people out of those houses and into those downtown apartments, we're freeing up those houses for that potential multifamily living as well. So there's some real connections there that follow one another when we do that.
Crime issues are something you talked about in your campaign. You had a question that poverty has been identified as a key driver of community violence, crime, substance abuse, untreated mental and physical health issues. What plans, if any, do you have to invest in our impoverished population to get to the root of those issues rather than react to the symptoms? Mike Dundas, let's start with you.
Sure. Actually, it's a great perspective. Is we can't just address the symptoms, right? We have to address the root cause problems, which is high cost of living in Vermont, right? It costs a lot of money to live here, and not a lot of opportunities to make money. I think what we're seeing nationally, not just here in Rutland, but what we're seeing nationally is a shift in pay scale and pay schedule and what people are willing to do in their day-to-day work. And I think that having that opportunity for people to find a position or a job that pays them enough to live and live in a home that they can afford, right? Those are all pieces of the core problem. I actually think that the bigger issue here is, and the reason that we see such poverty in Rutland is because there's not a larger support system generating more jobs, right? So we don't have enough people here to go shopping. We don't have, I mean, people here shop now, but think about, another 500 people per year, increasing restaurants, increasing retail outlets, increasing other opportunities. What that does is that creates jobs on all scales, on all sides. So we have to, I think that their poverty is actually a symptom of the bigger problem, which is that decreased population. And if we can continue to focus on growing the population in Rutland, we'll actually be able to lift people up and give them more opportunities to work and earn and take care of their families.
David, let me repeat the question to you. Poverty has been identified as a key driver of community violence, crime, substance abuse, untreated mental and physical health issues. What plans, if any, do you have to invest in our impoverished population to get to the root of those issues rather than react to the symptoms?
Well, I would agree with the premise of your question. I think that it's multifaceted. I think over the last 20 or 30 years, a lot of our issues, not just in poverty, but in crime, are a symptom of a breakup of the family unit. It's so different than not just when I was growing up, but I think even a younger person around here, when Michael was growing up, we were members of, and it didn't have to be, the traditional family. It could be any kind of family, but there was structure. There was consequences for your actions, both at home and at school. I think, investing and continuing to support your education system. The Rutland City Public Schools, the private schools here in our community do a tremendous job. They're up against an awful lot. The kids that are coming to school are bringing all sorts of issues with them. And if you invest in education, if you invest in upgrading the quality of your jobs, in the situation that you have here as far as economically, then I think that you are addressing the underlying issue, which is poverty. And I think that that's the way the city should focus on it. And I think it's something that the mayor has, and will lead on.
I want to slide into infrastructure. There are a number of different questions about that. Rutland City voters are going to be weighing in on 2 bond initiatives on town meeting, totaling more than $4 million to pay for needed pond, water, and sewer upgrades in the city. David Lair, let me ask you this question first. What kind of a master plan exists for capital improvements like this in Rutland City? And if there isn't one, why not?
So I would say that yes, there is one. And I want to commend my predecessor, who back in, I believe it was the 2009-2010 timeframe, put out a plan along with his DPW commissioner that in order to address the aging infrastructure, mostly the underground pipes, but we're addressing streets and sidewalks at the same time, that it was going to cost $100 million over 100 years. And at the time, there was quite a bit of shock value. I can remember, gasping forever when I heard that, because that's that kind of money is not something that we have readily available. But it's he put in place that I have continued on since I was elected in 2017, and we have aggressively addressed that aging infrastructure. It's 125 years old now, but we do it in a thoughtful way, and we do it with a plan 2, 3, 5, and 10 years out. We've been able to acquire about $8.8 million in grants over the last several years. That goes from that is actually a savings to local taxpayers. That's been able to go directly into these projects. So there is a plan. There's a continuing plan. We've aggressively been doing it. We work on the underground pipes first, and then we come along and put a plan together to pave the streets. A recent $5 million bond, we're doing twice as much paving and twice as much sidewalks as we ever had. The neighborhoods are looking great, and we're going to continue that for the next 2 years.
So Dave answered that we do in fact have a capital improvements plan. Michael Dunges, would you change that plan, and knowing what you do from the Board of Aldermen, perhaps you're familiar with how it exists now? What are your thoughts on the capital improvement plan for the city?
Sure. So if we think about the plan that we have in place, and what Dave was just mentioning, we have a plan to address systems. So we have a systems plan. We have a plan to pave some roads when we need to pave roads. We have a plan to fix the plumbing that's been going on for quite some time. That's not really a capital improvement plan. A capital improvement plan says, here's exactly what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, and here's how we're going to gather the money to do that. So the 1% option tax that's on the ballot right now is, one of the steps to get us there, that will relieve the burden of the local city taxpayer and allow that capital improvement plan to be funded. And that's another option on the ballot, right? There's another option on the ballot to actually set up a real capital improvement plan specific to major projects in the city. So when we tie those two things together, we can start to apply funds. The other challenge that we see with the plans as they've been laid out versus how we're going about them is we're going for bonds to fix these problems. So if it's $100 million over 100 years, $1 million a year, then in the budget and how we appropriate that money, we should see that paving line item or water line items appropriately assigned. However, what's happened is we've continued to cut those line items and then we go and borrow. So now we're using the same amount of money. It's actually costing us more because we're paying interest on it. So we're doing that at the under the guise that we're trying to save money on the budget, which is fair, but we're doing it at the behest of their future, and we're having to pay more interest. So even though it might only be 2% or 4% interest, that's 4% interest over 30 years once that money started to use, and that's going to cost a lot more in the long run. So that capital improvement plan, tied with the option tax and tied with good budgeting, we can actually solve those problems for less money. It will look different, but it will absolutely be something that we can achieve.
Can I just follow up a little bit? Because I think at the beginning of your question, you were talking about infrastructure and it turned into the capital improvement plan. So I just want to make sure that people understand that we've had also a capital improvement plan on the books since about 2014 or 15, but it's never been funded. There was no outside funding source. We did not go to the property taxpayers because there really wasn't the capacity to do that. You are exactly right, and we both talked about this before. We put that forward. The 1% local option tax, part of that is going to go toward putting seed money into that capital improvement plan, which talks about mostly, I think, not just the infrastructure, but mostly our buildings. Our buildings are aging. We own a ton of property around the city. They're all in the 100-year range. They're all need improvements, and this is really the only way that we're going to be able to support those needs is through that plan. That and putting some of that money toward the pension obligations that are at a deficit, and to provide some property tax relief for our taxpayers. Thanks.
Fair enough. I want to stay on infrastructure. Currently, this question asker was wondering, 3 out of the 4 highway routes entering Rutland are closed to bicycle travel. Do you intend to remedy this situation, and how going forward do you plan to make Rutland City more accessible for all modes of transportation, including pedestrians, bikes, wheelchairs, everyone? Let me start with that.
Sure. So a lot of those routes are routes that we work on the state with. We actually, in one of our Board of Highway meetings, asked to do an evaluation of Woodstock Avenue and Route 7 North to look at what that looks like. I know there's a lot of concern actually out there about shrinking those roads, removing lanes, and causing more traffic. What we can do though is we can look at how can we solve the problem without increasing traffic and allowing bikes to travel those pathways, right? We really have to do the research and look at the data. So I'm a big data guy. I love information. I love learning. And we have the ability with the state, because they'll do it for us, capturing the information about what happens on those roadways and how we can use them and how we can better those things. So I know in the past, there's been some decisions made to change the way roads operate. It's been a burden on the citizens. There wasn't good communication in the history. That's not how we need to go about it, right? We need to collect the data, we need to collect the information, we need to put that information into use and purpose, and then focus on a new plan. So I do think that we can actually make Rutland much more accessible to bikes, and I think we can do it in an intelligent way without affecting movement in and out of our city. It's not going to. We aren't going to make a decision that's going to hurt transportation. Everything that we're going to do from the mayor's office, if I'm elected, is going to actually just continue to add benefit and do it in a way that's very Vermont and very relevant.
Taylor, I'm going to ask you the same question. Currently, 3 out of the 4 of the highway routes entering Rutland are closed to bicycle traffic. Do you intend to remedy this situation, and how, going forward, do you plan to make Rutland City more accessible for all modes of transportation, including pedestrians, bikes, and wheelchairs?
So we have been approached just recently from the state in anticipation of repaving Woodstock Avenue and North and South Main Street. As many of you will recall, we did have quite a bit of debate 6-8 years ago about what's called a road diet, and that was changing Woodstock Avenue's configuration from 4 lanes to 3 lanes and putting a bike lane on the side of the roads by the curb cuts. That was deemed by the majority of the community members as unsafe and unwise on that stretch of road. They have come back to us again in anticipation of repaving in 2025, and they again have put the idea of changing those configurations on the table. So back then I was opposed to changing those for a lot of different reasons, mainly being safety. I still am on Woodstock Avenue. I think there are opportunities perhaps on North Main Street for the 4 lanes to become 3 and have a safe, accessible bike lane on the side of the road. It's a straight stretch of road. There's less curb cuts. I think there are opportunities there. But I think what the also is we have to have, and we can lead along with the state agency of transportation, but identifying the less traveled side streets where we already have some bike lanes, but we can put in, a master bike route through the city. Biking is becoming a huge draw to the city of Rutland. Pine Hill Park, in partnership with the recreation department, and everything that's happening up at Killington. The last figure I saw was there's 30,000 people coming to the city of Rutland on an annual basis using Pine Hill Park. 30,000 people, and that's 30,000 people that are using our restaurants, that are going to our retail shops. That is something that we need to build on, and will again be a way to address our population decline, because that would give them a reason to come and live in Rutland.
You segued perfectly into my next question, Dave. Recreation is an economic driver for Rutland, as David just mentioned, and it is also a primary reason that many young professionals choose to move to Rutland. Many of our local recreational assets are funded and maintained by volunteers, including Pine Hill Park, as you just mentioned. What would you do as mayor to ensure that these assets continue to be maintained and strengthened?
Well, since over the last 6 years, we have made tremendous progress in the recreation arena. We have just an #1 recreation superintendent, who, by the way, I hired not long after I was elected in 2017. And she's done a tremendous job. We all know who she is, Kim Peters. Thank goodness for everything that she's done up to this point. And I've tried to support her in all her endeavors. And we have built out our not just recreational space by a new park in downtown Rutland, but by increasing the amount of participation in the number of people that are involved in all the programs. The programming is just skyrocketed. The number of people that are taking part in those programs, people that from all ages, from children all the way up to senior citizens, up at the Guiding Center. It truly is an asset that we have built on. We are going to continue to build on, and I think one other thing that I put a plug in for is the Rutland Recreation Community Center. How lucky we are to have a place that we can call our own and folks can access for a minimal amount of cost and go down there and participate in all sorts of activities, from walking, to basketball, to all sorts of different events. And those are the types of things that we can continue to build on. And we're very lucky to have the superintendent and her crew running that department.
This question also asked about the volunteer groups that work in different parts of the city, like
Yes.
Pine Hill Park, and they're not necessarily under Peter's purview.
Right. Not necessarily under her purview, but they work hand in hand with her. And I know she meets regularly with not just the Pine Hill Park folks, but people who are involved in volunteer activities up at the Garden Center that I mentioned. The seniors, they've got a tremendous amount of programs up there that again are seeing the numbers increase exponentially year over year. And a lot of that stuff is volunteers. We just had Winterfest. I think Mike volunteered during Winterfest. And, you know, the weather didn't necessarily cooperate for all the events, but it was a way for the community to get together and enjoy, you know, the winter and the events that they can here in downtown Rutland. And those are the types of things that volunteers can continue to do.
So Mike Dundas, I'm going to throw that question to you. Focusing on recreation as an economic driver for Rutland, it's also a primary reason that many young professionals choose to move to Rutland. Many of our local recreational assets are funded and maintained by volunteers. What would you do as mayor to ensure that these assets continue to be maintained and strengthened?
It's a great question. So there's two tiers of assets, right? There are assets that are in the city, right? Like Pine Hill Park, Parks and Rec Department's buildings, and all the parks in town. And then there's the assets around the community. So I'm going to focus on the ones in the city, but I want to recognize that question, right? A lot of people come and live in Rutland because it's 20 minutes from Killington, and 20 minutes from the lakes, and 20 minutes from another location where they can go hiking or biking. So there's a lot of great things that bring people here, but to keep those assets in the city growing and becoming better, I think ties directly to how we can fund those volunteer organizations. So if you look at the bike trails that are getting built, they're constantly looking for grants. If you're looking at Pine Hill Park or the Belmont Trails, they're constantly looking for dollars. And one of the things that the city has, just by being the city, is the power to apply for those grants and assist those organizations in investing in those different areas. So one of the things that you'll hear me talk about a lot is I plan on hiring a grant writer at the city as soon as we can, as soon as we can find the money in the budget to do it, because bringing additional federal dollars and state dollars to our city is how we're going to grow without burdening the taxpayer at all, right? When you apply for a federal grant, for every $8 that comes out of that grant, we only have to match 2, right? Most of the time. There's different variants of it, but sometimes we even only have to match 1. So for every $10, we're paying $1, and the federal government's paying 9. All of those recreational facilities, there's all sorts of programs out there that have to be creative and thoughtful. But when we do that, when we're creative and thoughtful, we can actually bring money in to fund those organizations to help them continue that growth, which is one of those just amazing attractors for all.
And if I could, just follow up real quick, if I could, thank you. So I just wanted to mention, you brought up the idea of hiring a new grant writer. I just want to send out some kudos to probably the premier grant writer in the state of Vermont, as far as I'm concerned, that's Barbara Swalley. And she does a tremendous amount of work for us in all the arenas, you know, across all venues. And I know some of our department heads are into grant writing themselves and actually do a tremendous job of bringing that money in. So I just wanted to bring that.
And I'll just follow that up real quick to say Barbara is absolutely incredible. Her focus is grant administration, though, which is why having a grant writer, they're two different things. Grant administration is a very, very tedious task, and she does a phenomenal job working and running through that. But a grant writer is very specialized, and that's why.
Are we done with grants?
We're good. Thank you.
We need more.
How many grant writers out there they're hiring? Rutland City and Rutland Town could save money and resources by working together. Do you have a strategy that would get the two communities to merge more services?
You sure you don't want to answer this one? No, I'm kidding. So So I actually had somebody reach out to me just the other day and say, hey, in our neighborhood, we're struggling with a well that doesn't produce water at the rate that it should for the 10 to 12 houses that we have in the neighborhood. We're in Rutland town. Is that something that Rutland City would be willing to work with? Is providing city water to the town in this area, or city sewer? We actually already do that, right? We already combine utilities and resources. So there's water going out towards the mall. There's actually, we do the same thing for Killington, right? So they have a sewer pipeline that comes down the mountain that ties into our sewer system. So we're not unfamiliar when it comes to working with the communities around us. And yes, Rutland Town, because we're surrounded by them, there's a lot that goes on there. Our fire departments do mutual aid today. That's more of a fire system, right? So that's something that they've already agreed to, and that happens all over the state. But when Rutland Town needs help, they can call our fire department. And actually, turns out that our fire department called the town for extra assistance. So leveraging things like mutual aid, working with utilities and being able to provide that, assisting the police force, all those things happen today. I think where we can add some value as the city is to think about how we plan out the edges of our town in the future and how we can continue to provide those services, right? We can become, at least in the short term, a service provider to Rutland Town. They'll have to invest in the infrastructure to grow it, but I think there's a pairing there that, at this point, I think we're at a point where we can have that open discussion and kind of keep a lot of that old emotion out and start moving in the right direction. So.
Taylor, same question. Rutland City and Rutland Town could save money and resources by working together. Do you have a strategy that would get the two communities to merge more services?
So one of the things that I wanted to do immediately after I was first elected was to kind of rekindle a regular dialogue with town government and the folks who were in the select board chairs. And I was able to do that. And we've developed a relationship with folks like Josh Tiernzini, who went on to become a state senator, who now has moved away, and the current select board chair, Don Chaffee. And there are things that have just been mentioned that we already do work together on, and certainly our police and fire, they're in regular contact whenever there is a large event on the fire side, either in the town or the city. The other organization will cover that. Either go and help and aid or cover their, in case there's any other calls. So you're right. We do provide water and sewer for the town. I think we have a mutually cooperative relationship and beneficial to both communities. They pay a little bit of a higher rate for their water, but we provide the infrastructure and pay for that infrastructure on our end to provide that. So there are a lot of things that are currently going on between the city and the town. There's, certainly several folks out there who remind me regularly that, maybe it's time for the city and the town to start talking about, I hate to use the word, but I'm going to merger. And,
I heard it. Wouldn't it be first?
Wouldn't it be first? Because I think it would be wonderful for the city and wonderful for this whole region. But, again, I'm not sure that the folks in the town see it the same way that we do. And until that changes, we will continue to work on the things that we're working on right now.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Let me ask this one. Now that we've talked about a number of the various issues, some of the challenges, you've heard a lot of the questions that have been brought up. What is your vision for the city in 5 years? And what are the 3 most important and tangible steps that you as mayor will take to get there? David, I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, my vision for the city in 5 years is to have a safe, welcoming community that welcomes all folks from all walks of life, that they feel that they can raise a family here, walk the streets safely, have a place, have a robust school system, to be able to provide a good job and secure housing for their family, and just feel good about their community, both internally and when they're talking to folks that live outside of our community. You know, I'm up in Montpelier quite a bit. Actually, the perception of Rutland is pretty positive up there when you talk to folks. When people are talking to me, they say, "Oh, you guys got a lot going on down here in Rutland, don't you?" And you know what we do? We have a lot going on. We have a lot of great things going on, and that's the kind of community that we want. We want to be safe. We want to be secure. We want to, as a family here, we want to thrive. We want to provide for our families. We want to build out housing and everything else, and all the other issues that we've talked about today. But I think those are the core values that we want to see in our community in 5 years. And I think some of the things that we have been doing over the last 6 years, and some of the things that I want to work on in the next 2 years, will build toward that vision.
Can I just press you though? This question asker was looking for kind of 3 very tangible steps to get that safe community that you are talking about that families would feel good about.
Well, tangible steps would be to talk about specifics. I think we absolutely have to end the hotel program and take care of our homeless population and do it in a humane way, and provide adequate housing through the local nonprofits, through city government, in cooperation with the business community to address that portion of the equation, and address the low-level crime and provide our police department with the adequate resources, which we do already, but to build up their numbers and to address what you've been talking about in those ways. Well,
Michael Dunges, talking about the final question here. What is your vision for the city in 5 years? And what are the 3 most important and tangible steps you as mayor will take to get there?
Sounds great. Vision's a big word that I use. I tend to talk about a slightly longer vision, which is a 20-year master plan. But along the way, we need to have 2, 5, and 10-year plans. So if we look at 5 years, absolutely safe, welcoming, accessible community to everyone. It's the top of the list, right? We need people to be able to come to our town and feel comfortable when they're here, right? To know that they can get the resources that they need and access them in a way that is, easy for them, or at least gives them the ability to get connected to those resources, and we can help them tie that together. I think that we'll see Rutland's population growing in 5 years, right? So if I'm mayor, that's a target, and we have to set that long-term target. We don't have that long-term target and set goals right now. And if we do that, even if we set it out 20 years, we can run 5. So what is the 5-year goals? What are the 3 things that we can do, right? I think one of the first things outside of having that city master plan is to say, hey, City Hall, we're going to make it more accessible, and we're going to share more about what we need to attract people to our community in order for this community to grow. That's it. It's really simple. We talked earlier about these amazing assets that are around our city, these awesome things that we have to bring young people here. We are at an inflection point. All sorts of things change due to COVID. And we've seen other communities throughout the state of Vermont grow because they captured a group of people who could, families and couples and individuals alike, who could now work remotely and live in a town. We weren't prepared for that, and we can be prepared. So in the next 5 years, we'll see more of those people moving here that have hybrid work. One person, there's 15 jobs at the hospital that are nursing jobs available right now. I think that's the right number. Those people can bring their partner along with them. Nurses can work at the hospital, and their partner can work remotely. So that's the first one, right? Is attract people to Rutland. The second one is make City Hall more accessible. We have amazing people that work at City Hall today. But if you come in to get a permit or get a license to start a small business, you're going to have to go to 3 or 4 departments. It's not really easy to move around. So that accessible City Hall, which is also part of that outreach, is a big piece of that. One of the things I'll do right away when I'm elected mayor is I'm going to move my office downstairs. So right when you walk in the door, you'll be able to see, come and see me on the left-hand side there. And that'll hopefully, really draw people here to come and communicate with us about what their their needs are so we can try to meet them. And then the last piece that I think is really important when we talk about targeted population growth is to have a plan with our partners, right? If we target a number, so I did say 10 to 15,000, but that's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to be, the first year it's going to be 100 new people, the second year it's going to be 200, right? And this is the same thing that the hub is talking about when they go to grow. They're talking about growing incrementally so that they can get to this target that is so important. This city is built for 30,000 people. It doesn't look like it right now because our families are smaller, but that's why we convert single family homes into multi, right? That's why we have these opportunities for people to come in and develop properties. That's why we need to tear down some of these old houses that are falling apart that nobody lives in now and build new ones where more people can live. So targeting that population growth over a period of time and having everybody focused on that goal in the city of Rutland, right? Everybody who's working together, that's going to get us there. That's going to get us to the 5-year mark, which is increased population, where the city is even better than it is today, better roads, better sidewalks, because there's people to share the load, share the burden, and we tie that in. One more thing, we tie that into this 1% option tax if it passes, and we'll be able to reinvest in our city over the next 5 years in a way that's never been possible before. And we should have done this a long time ago, but now we have the opportunity to do it. We're going to hopefully capture it. We all hope you vote for that. I believe Dave agrees with that too, to be able to use those funds to really reinvest into our city.
That is all we have time for this evening. I want to thank Mayor David Lair, Alderman Michael Dunges for being here tonight, sharing their thoughts. I want to thank all of you for braving the elements. I want to thank Jim Savatasso from the Rutland Herald, also Eric Millette for hosting us tonight at the Paramount Theater, Sarah Nadler and the crew from Peg TV for filming. And again, a big thank you to all of you for coming out and to submitting questions. I'm Nadia Keck. Thanks for joining us. We hope you found this forum.